Welcome to Cheating Diaries. Today, we will listen to a story about an office affair. Let's all sit back and enjoy. David stepped through the doors of his new company, a mixture of excitement and nerves bubbling inside him. At 25, he had just graduated and was about to embark on a new chapter in his life. Working at Titan Corporation was a dream come true, one that many aspired to, and David knew he was lucky to have secured a job there. Titan Corporation was known not only for its size, but also for its modern dynamic working environment. From his first day, David could feel the buzz of energy in the office, but one person stood out to him more than anyone else. Rachel Eek is the head of the finance department, a woman in her early 30s with sharp features and an air of confidence, slender poised, and always wearing a gentle smile. She caught the attention of many in the office, including David, though he knew she was married with 2 young children. Her elegance and approachable nature made him feel comfortable. Every time they interacted, their first meeting, David had heard of Rachel through the office grapevine. But the opportunity to work directly with her came unexpectedly. One Friday afternoon, Rachel needed an assistant to finish an important financial report for upper management, and David was chosen. They sat across from each other, focusing on the figures before them, but the atmosphere wasn't as tense as David had imagined. Rachel was patient, guiding him through the complex tasks she was working on. The long hours they spent together broke down the barriers between their ages and positions. "You're doing great," Rachel said, with a warm smile as David finished his section of the report. David's heart skipped a beat. Although he knew she was married, he couldn't deny the growing attraction he felt toward her. Their conversations, which started as strictly professional, gradually shifted toward personal matters. Rachel opened up about a life, her husband who traveled frequently for work, and the stress of juggling her career and raising 2 young children. David, despite being younger, listened with empathy and understanding. He no longer saw her merely as a successful woman, but as someone who was lonely and overwhelmed, and from that moment an invisible bond began to form between them, the blossoming of the affair. At first, their relationship remained within the boundaries of a close colleague friendship. They had lunch together, occasionally exchanged messages after work, but neither thought about crossing the line. However, one weekend evening, Rachel sent David a message. She said she was feeling stressed and needed someone to talk to. David didn't think twice and immediately responded. They met at a quiet cafe. The intimate setting seemed to pull the emotions they had both been suppressing out into the open. Rachel, with a sad smile and distant gaze, appeared to be caught in the throes of loneliness within her marriage. David, in that moment, couldn't stop his heart, even though his mind told him things were going too far. That evening they didn't just talk. A stolen kiss occurred in a fleeting moment of passion, one neither of them could control. And from that point on, everything changed. Their meetings after work became more frequent. Rachel began lying to her husband, telling him she had to stay late or meet friends to spend time with David. David, knowing the affair was wrong, couldn't stop. He was drawn to Rachel's allure, and the genuine affection he had for her only deepened his involvement in the affair. Her husband's suspicion. Rachel's seemingly perfect life began to unravel when her husband, James, noticed changes in her behavior. James was a successful businessman who often traveled, but he'd always trusted Rachel. However, recently she had been coming home late more frequently and seemed evasive when he asked about her day. One evening, James returned home earlier than expected after a long business trip. When he entered the house, Rachel wasn't there, and only a dim light from the living room flickered quietly. James went through her things, trying to find some clue about what had changed with the woman he had spent nearly 10 years of his life with. He picked up Rachel's phone and saw a message from an unknown number. "I miss you." James felt his heart sink. He knew what was going on. The climax of the affair. A few days later, James decided to follow Rachel. He wanted to know if his suspicions were true. That afternoon, Rachel told James she was meeting an old friend to catch up. James nodded, but his mind was already filled with doubt. As Rachel drove off, James followed. At a distance, she drove out of the city to a small, secluded motel. James parked his car a short distance away, watching from the shadows. When he saw Rachel's car parked outside the motor hotel, his heart broke. There was no longer any doubt Rachel was cheating on him. James waited outside, watching the motel entrance in silence. About an hour later, he saw Rachel walk out hand in hand with David. Neither of them saw James, but that didn't make it any less painful, the painful ending. James couldn't hold back his anger any longer. He marched toward them, ready to confront the truth he had desperately tried to deny. Rachel froze in place as she saw her husband standing before her, his face a mixture of fury and hurt. "Explain this," James demanded, his voice barely controlled. Rachel stammered, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. David stood silently by her side, overwhelmed with guilt and shame. After a long, heavy pause, James spoke once more, his voice flat and final. "It's over. The affair had come to light, and the consequences were unavoidable. Rachel lost her family. David lost his self-respect and the respect of his colleagues, and James lost his faith in and the woman he had once loved deeply, the consequences of a moment of weakness." Rachel stood frozen under the dim lights in front of the motel, her eyes locked onto James's furious gaze. Her heart tightened, a flood of regret and guilt overtaking her, but the words failed to escape her lips. She never imagined that her moment of weakness would be discovered. Like this, James didn't say another word, turning away in silence, leaving Rachel standing there, her hands trembling, unsure of how to face this reality. David fared no better. He had never experienced anything like this before. He knew that his relationship with Rachel had long crossed the line, but being caught in the act threw him into a state of turmoil. Was this worth losing everything? For he had just lost his innocence, and now his job and reputation among colleagues were at risk. The days after, since that fateful night, Rachel and James hadn't exchanged a word. Rachel returned home to a deadly silence, her heart aching at the empty, emotionless look in James's eyes. The trust he had given her for so many years had shattered beyond repair. James began leaving the house early and returning late, avoiding Rachel at every turn. In those lonely moments, Rachel realized she hadn't just lost her husband, but also the peace that once existed in her life. She didn't know how to salvage her marriage, nor was she sure she even deserved to. Guilt and internal struggles. Meanwhile, David faced intense internal struggles. He could stop thinking about Rachel, about the moments they shared. But at the same time, guilt weighed heavily on his mind. He wondered if he had only been a temporary fling for Rachel, something to fill the void in her life. Each day at the office, he had to confront the suspicious glances from his colleagues, especially as rumors about his affair with Rachel began to spread. Rachel wasn't spared either. During meetings, she could feel the eyes of her co-workers boring into her, and the gossip behind her back made her feel suffocated. The career she had spent years building now seemed to be on the verge of collapse. A woman who once prided herself on her strength and independence now had to face the ruins of both her personal and professional life. James's silent revenge, though James didn't explode in anger. Immediately he silently plotted his revenge. He decided not to make a public spectacle of the affair, but in his mind he was already crafting a plan to make Rachel pay for her betrayal. First, he began digging into David's life, the young man who had stolen his wife's heart. He researched David's background, his career, and his vulnerabilities. Then James started making life increasingly difficult for Rachel. He cut back on family expenses, refused help with the children, and gradually created an irreparable distance between them. Rachel felt suffocated, alone, and completely lost. Their children also sensed the tension in the house, which only added to Rachel's heartbreak. But James didn't stop there. He secretly sent the photos he had taken at the motel that night to Rachel's boss. Not only that, he spread rumors that Rachel had used her relationships to advance her career. This damaged Rachel's reputation severely, and she began to fear that she might lose the position she had worked so hard for over the years. Rachel's guilt and awakening weeks of tension took their toll, and Rachel fell into a deep depression. She had lost everything she once held: dear James's love, the respect of her colleagues, and even her own sense of self-worth. She began to question whether her relationship with David had ever been worth it. The moments of passion and the feeling of reliving her youth were fleeting, and now she had to face the consequences that could not be undone. Rachel finally sat down to confront herself. She knew that her relationship with David had cost her everything, but the worst part was that she had betrayed the values she once held dear. She couldn't continue to sink further into this mess. It was time to make a final decision: David's life after the scandal. Meanwhile, David couldn't run from the truth forever. His relationship with Rachel had not only cost him his self-respect, but also pushed him into isolation at work. His colleagues began to look at him with suspicion, and rumors of his affair with Rachel spread like wildfire throughout the company. David felt he no longer belonged there. One day, David received a notice from his boss that he was being transferred to a different position. It was the inevitable consequence of the scandalous affair he had been part of. David realized that there was no future for him at the company, and he decided to leave to start over. However, it wasn't easy. The guilt and sense of loss still haunted him, and he had no idea if he could ever regain balance in his life. The ending in Thelison. Rachel finally sat down with James in a tense conversation. She admitted all her mistakes, expressed her deep regret, and pleaded to salvage their marriage. But James was too hurt to forgive. He coldly told her that it was over and they would begin the divorce process. Rachel's life had taken a completely different turn. She had to learn to live with loss, not just materially but emotionally. Her relationship with David had left a deep scar on her soul, but it also made her realize just how far she'd strayed from the values she once believed in. David, after leaving the company, learned that impulsive decisions could destroy a future. He was determined to start anew, though the road ahead was still unclear. The story ends with pain and regret, but it also serves as a powerful reminder that in life, no decision comes without consequences.